Hello and welcome to the couch. We're going to be doing a deep dive into Jungian psychology, some of his colleagues' work, varying viewpoints, as well as some of the criticisms that his work has faced. Um, but the reason why I want to do this is because you've probably heard me mention Jung's work quite a bit, like in my ebook, the Combating the Inner Critics, as well as the last video, Embracing the Shadow, Unleashing Inner Strength with Autumn Shadow Work. And I just want to shine a light on how his theories have shaped the study of modern psychology, as well as some of the more problematic things with the theories that I know I question, even though they seem to connect and make sense. But one of the big things, and I'll try to keep this as concise as possible, I want to note that all of this is purely based upon my own research and observations. I'm not a psychologist, but I am intrigued by the human psychology, and I love sharing in discourse around these topics. So feel free in the comments or via private message to reach out, share some of your references or things that you've researched. And also, please note, I'm doing my best with these pronunciations. My tongue keeps getting tied, and I think I've recorded this at least 3 times at this point. So I'm going to try to keep as short and sweet as possible and keep my pronunciation as accurate as possible as well. But sometimes my southernisms and other things mess me up. But let's get to the point. Carl Jung has left quite a legacy. He's a towering figure in psychology who has introduced concepts like the collective unconscious, archetypes, and individuation. These have shaped our understanding of the human psyche and influenced many others that you'll hear me talk about, such as Carolyn Myss, the author of such work as The Sacred Contract and the Archetype Cards, and also Julia Cameron, author of The Artist Way, which I'm leading a group through currently. And some of these Jungian concepts they have influenced psychology and self-discovery as we know it today. And so let's unpack some of those core concepts, shall we? The collective unconscious is believed to be a reservoir of shared human experiences, symbols, and archetypes that exist within everyone's individual psyche. And this is from diverse backgrounds. It seems to the reservoir of shared experience as well as wisdom seems to transcend cultures and generations, and it serves as a link for us to our ancestors as well, because these symbols have appeared throughout myths, stories, artwork, all through history. And some of these universal symbols and themes allow us to dive deeper into the human psyche because it uncovers insights into our fears, our desires, even our aspirations. And it provides an avenue for self-reflection, because understanding certain archetypes and symbolism allows us to recognize when we start seeing these in our own dreams, thoughts, and behaviors. And so then we start gaining insight on our as well as other people's personal journeys and inner conflicts. Some of these archetypes might include the hero, the shadow, the animi animus. These are Jungian archetype themes, but Carolyn Myss, she is the creator of the archetype card deck in the accompanying book, and it really creates a visual representation of the light and shadow side of these aspects in very relatable ways, from the king and queen card to the goddess, the the prostitute, the prostitute is less about the feminine side, but about taking money for our what we do, our body, our gifts, that type of thing. The gossip, or the storyteller, rather. There's the light and the dark side of it. The storyteller weaves tales, so does the gossiper, but the gossiper is the shadow side. The miser may be considered a very wealthy and everything, but then he may not share his wealth. The healer, the martyr, the hero, the athlete. There's so many archetype cards that are out there, and they allow us to dive deeper into some of these Jungian thoughts, right? Especially the myths that arise around some of these more animalistic sides of ourselves, and it breaks it down in a more digestible manner. And from what we can tell, all of these symbols that are relevant or represented, rather, are cross-universal. They are cross-cultural in communication and understanding, because if we say queen, we all immediately have an image of a queen or a god, the same with goddess. King and queen, goddess, we all have a very immediate viewpoint of what that might look like. It may differ according to our cultural background or time era that we've grew up in, but we have a visual representation that comes to mind immediately in that manner, right? Same as if we said doctor or healer type situation, or teacher. So across different cultural backgrounds, we can recognize these shared symbols, their meanings, and that allows us to foster empathy and connection according to these theories, right? And also, let's dive a little bit into art history a little bit in this, because as artists, writers, creators have drawn inspiration from this collective unconscious of symbols and stuff, it has been utilized throughout history to help with spreading knowledge, with spreading understanding. A very easily recognized viewpoint of this might be like the Vanitas from the Dutch Golden Era of painting. Same with some of the more religious images commissioned by the Roman Catholic Church. That represent religious figures, Jesus on the cross, Mother Mary, the saints, the biblical stories, and the prodigal son and stuff like that. They all take color, shape, associations with natural items to tell a story. Because in that time era, when they were trying to share Christianity throughout the European continent, I'm talking about a very specific, space in art history, and very localized, because this, is vastly different if you talk about the colonization of the Americas or Asia and Australia, and the experiences were much different, but some of the same symbolism and stuff comes across. It's the same as, if we went from a basilica or a cathedral with images of rain and wind and tumultuous seas, and went into a cave or went to see the cliff drawings and saw symbolism representing storms and water and that kind of movement. That's that universal or collective unconsciousness that they're talking about. We understand these symbolisms, and as the Roman Catholic Church started commissioning these paintings, the artists were tapping into that to be able to tell the stories of the prophets and of the disciples and saints and the Trinity, right, and the birth of Christ, because they were able to reach through imagery, symbolism, the illiterate, or the parts of the continent that were not able to read in Latin, right? And the same with like the Benatas paintings that I mentioned too. You know, they take symbolism for fruit and animals, the carcasses of these rabbits and stuff like that, to sort of tell a story about the life of, or create a hierarchy around certain things. So like you might have pomegranates and peaches representing sensuality, fertility, stuff like that. A rabbit might be nervousness and feeling preyed upon and stuff like that. And some of these the symbolism that is represented in those are also across oracle cards and tarot decks, forms of divination, because these these symbols, like they said, they sort of serve as a timeless theme that we can start unpacking, right? I know I digress, but we'll get back on Jungian theory very quickly. But you can understand how it's so easy to sit down with a tarot deck and be able to read a story. Of course, we get into it of hits, but you know, we can get a highlight of what the emotion or the experience is by what's in that card. And that's where we start spinning the tale, or channeling the message and the insight for this moment in time. But let's get back to this. So all of this artistic expression serves as a form of language, right? That allows us to dive deeper into spiritual and philosophical insights that we might not be able to always comprehend verbally. It gives us something tangible to hang on to. And through that, we can start experiencing connection to others, as well as deeper connection with ourselves, and healing, psychological healing, as we resolve inner conflicts and achieve personal growth over time, right? Because we start being able to see and experience the journey as a co-creator with the divine, rather than having it faded, right? We have free will and we can direct our path, but it can often be difficult to find the purpose or the meaning of life. So sometimes, by diving into the universal collective unconscious and our own learning, we can have a deeper understanding of that. And this, therefore, then starts to create a bridge between the human psyche, the human unconscious, to the divine and the spiritual, if that makes sense. And then we start experiencing the individuation, that personal growth, as we start to become more self-aware and aligned to our true authentic selves. And we first start experiencing individuation as we separate from the collective as an adolescent. This is when we first start maybe butting heads with our family members, our peers, because our personal growth and wants and needs and desires vary from other people. So we move from the collective being part of the whole in the present moment to then start realizing our own identity, that self-realization, and then just know that that is not where all of that forms in adolescence. This journey continues through our life, and we continue to unpack and learn new things. And the purpose of this video is to really, it's undeniable that Jung's work has left a mark upon our history, upon our study of the human psyche, but it doesn't come without critiques, right? Because one of the main ones is there's a lack of empirical evidence. There's a lack of scientific validation for many of these theories, especially like the collective unconsciousness, because it is so challenging to actually measure. The archetypes, even. All of this is very hard to test scientifically, so it often leads to questioning the validity of it. A lot of things in the metaphysical realm, in the realm of spirituality, are hard to make tangible or understanding because it's hard to measure the unconscious and the other realms of existence, right? And so that becomes very, all of these unconscious, dreams and archetypal symbols, they all are inherently subjective and also resistant to even being measured in any quantitative measurement, right? And that's because there's such depth and richness to the human psyche. We have no real way of understanding or measuring what is fully capable in the human mind. And so it makes it more of something we have to feel and trust rather than being able to pinpoint and make it very tangible, because we're playing with inner symbolisms and the unconscious. So even across people, and this is one of the big things that I talk about in the artwork that I create, is I am capturing a moment in time. I am capturing one experience, which is mine, or maybe even in a larger realm, the experience of my family in an art piece, or my experience with a set group of individuals. But without having that same experience, the person coming up behind me to view the art piece may not have the same thing. So their symbolism may be slightly different. And that's where you have all of these nuances and the reason why we are capable of, one person having triggers or PTSD in one area and someone else not, because our lives are all very, very different, and there's no way to really chart or create a measurement of these experiences. And that leads us to the second problematic thing, is a lot of Jungian's terminology is very rich. It can be ambiguous. It can be complex because it's often puzzling, and the thought of self, the animi and the animus, the shadow, they're all very challenging to define in many ways because of just exactly what I was talking about. We all put our own experiences to the meaning of that. And so the practicality of these items can be hindered in a lot of ways because there's so many things left up to interpretation because they're multifaceted in their meaning. And so it can cause misunderstandings, especially as you talk about things, especially within Carolyn Mise's archetypes. I see this happen often when I'm talking about the prostitute energy. You you automatically associate that in a lot of times with concubine or a sex worker or something like that. But it's less about the actual act, but it's about the energy behind what you're doing. So in that case, allowing yourself to trade your time and your energy, your life force for money is prostituting yourself out. So knowing these different layers and understandings of what one term or symbol can mean can lead to these very strong personal connections, but huge misunderstandings along the way, because the challenge lies in translating the complex concepts into practical tools that allow us to create therapeutic treatments behind these things, as well as lead to self-discovery, because you might shy away from embracing or working with a prostitute because of these outdated beliefs or these connotations that come with it. And that leads us into another critique, which is gender, the problematic side behind gender and cultural biases, because there's a lot of argument about the views on masculinity and femininity being outdated and continuing to perpetuate the gender stereotypes. And the main thing is we have to remember when Jung was writing this stuff. The cultural biases, the gender are often reflective of the societal attitudes of the time that it was created, right? So it's often misaligned with some of our modern perspectives. It doesn't take away from the core essence of the teachings, though. So if we can move past the binaries that are created, between the masculinity and the femininity, or the concepts on the animi and animus, they limit us. So because they are not inclusive on gender identities, it can often make it very difficult to traverse these without triggers. So keeping that in mind and being able to move past, or finding a Jungian theorist that writes in a modern way, would be an approachable way of getting past some of that. But that doesn't lead us, that doesn't take away that these are very Eurocentric, patriarchal beliefs that are from a very Western perspective. And then that leads us into the neglect to properly recognize the rich cultural and spiritual traditions of non-Western societies that were often appropriated in the concepts that are taught, or the lack of representation, right? Because often Jung's focus is very Eurocentric. It's very much from a Western perspective, especially the archetypes, and they draw from Western myths and symbolism. But there are people that approach this, and you can apply it across different things. Just keep in mind, again, this was the result of a certain time era. So revisiting and reinterpreting to be more inclusive and relevant of diverse genders and cultural contexts is super, super important. And we need to keep working through some of this so that we do not devalue the learning that is available within this, and we start updating and in a response to the very the very limiting historical context that doesn't align to our contemporary values and understandings. Because within that, and not to be skipped over at all, is there's also a lack of ethical consideration, because a lot of Jung's personal beliefs and actions have been taken under scrutiny because of his involvement as a Nazi sympathizer during World War II. And take that into context as you will. You know, is it a basis of the time era, or is it his own personal beliefs? You know, and how can we take and pull those apart and really be able to use the teachings as they were meant rather than attach them to the one person, if that makes sense? Because a lot of times we discredit very, very important work because of the person it's attached to, and that can be very, very hindering to our growth as a society, because, or as a culture, or as a universe, because when we place very when we don't allow for other opinions and stuff to meld with certain things, it causes issues. That's not quite making sense, but anyway, I just, I want to put the emphasis on the work rather than the person, because through the introspection on your subjective experiences and dreams and your personal symbolism, we can start to really find a deep understanding for some of the things that we're experiencing, going through, or needing to heal. So shape this, since there's a lack of objectivity and it's very subjective to interpretation, you have to learn where this fits in your own personal life, if that makes sense at all. But moving on. So I want to sort of give a deeper view of that time era and to his contemporaries, by introducing you to some of the other psychologists and their contrasting theories that can also sort of influence how we explore psychology, right? And Sigmund Freud is probably one of the most recognizable names, alongside of Carl Jung. And his emphasis was in the ID, the ego, the super ego, whereas Jung is very archetypical or archetype focused. And they have a lot of interconnectedness, but the language can be different, because Jung is going very much from a universal focus, it seems, whereas Freud is very individualized from the get-go, focusing on the ego and the superego and stuff like that. Then we have Alfred Adler, that uses social factors as well, in conjunction to Jung's internal archetypes. So it's talking more about those generational traumas or societal traumas that lead to outdated beliefs, whereas Jung internalizes it yet again. There's Erik Erikson's stages of psychological development, whereas Jung talks more about lifelong individuation. So Erikson is more in stages, and then Jung is, the slowly unfolding consciousness. And Karen Horney is more of a feminist perspective that contrasts greatly with the anima-animus concepts of Jungian theories. So that's something to take a look into. And then Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis focus on thoughts and behaviors that very differ from the unconscious archetypical approach. The cognitive behavioral psychology is what that one is. And it's widely practiced in modern psychology, so keeping that in mind. And it emphasizes the CBT, the cognitive behavioral psychology, emphasizes the interplay between thoughts, emotions, and behavior, and aims to identify and modify the negative patterns of behavior. Whereas with Jungian theory, it's more about identifying how we can integrate and find more balance rather than snipping that limb off or something like that, if that makes sense. Because the this clipping of the negative or removing of the negative in itself leads to and contributes to psychological distress. Also, cognitive behavioral psychology is more evidence-based. It has very strong empirical foundations because it's been extensively researched and validated, because there's tangible items, right? Whereas Jung's theories are all mostly built in this metaphysical, airy space that doesn't really exist or doesn't, have full, we personally don't have full connection to, because we live in a physical realm, whereas a lot of the stuff that Jung is talking about is more in a spiritual dimension, if that makes sense. So within CBT, the workings of Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck, we start seeing more objective and practical comparisons. And they focus on specific techniques and interventions that can readily be applied to therapy. We've talked about that a little bit. And because the other theories within Jung's approach are mostly within something that's untangible and works with the unconscious, they don't believe that there is as much behavioral change or conscious thought process. So it's really individual, of course, how you should approach this, whether it's dependent upon their needs and preferences or their personal beliefs. So the cognitive side, the more modern approach could be more logical and more tangible for people, whereas Jungian theories and approaches are more based in trust and the internal presence and understanding rather than tangible objectives, if that makes sense. And so there's a lot of movement toward integration, toward holistic methods. So there are a lot of movement within practitioners to integrate elements of Jungian psychology with the practice of CBT in therapeutic approaches, because it allows you to meet the human psyche where it's at, rather than trying to force it into a box. Because often our own experiences, nothing is textbook. Like, there is nuances that are deeper, and so this allows a more holistic understanding of the treatment practices that people experience. So, where does that leave us? The main thing is, there's many profound insights within studying Jungian's theories and diving into archetypes and symbolism and stuff. But it's also very important to understand all of the viewpoints, you having scientific basis or a ground to stand on when you're talking about these things is super important. Empirical evidence can be very helpful in weeding out a lot of misinformation, but we also know that things can be deeper and resonate in different ways if we just learn to trust and accept things that don't often like sit well within the realm of logic and physicality, if that even kind of starts to ring true, because there's such a vast landscape of ideas within psychology that it can be daunting to understand and even start to unpack. And like I said, by no means do I understand all of these or connect or use everything exactly as it's taught. I take a little bit, a sprinkling from everyone, and sort of see where it applies and where it fits into my life. I take the more holistic point, but it's integral to do your own research and to understand the complexities of the times when these theories were written, to the personal lives of the creators, to what we can do as a modern society to really start to integrate some of these in a deeper manner, and also find more empirical evidence, because a lot of this Jungian theory type things has been well documented, and you see patterns arise across history, whether it's spicy psychology or just some fluke, it's an interesting one to start to unpack and explore. So let's just dive into trying to find out where we sit in this rich tapestry of everything, by embracing the shadows, diving into the depths, and illuminating some of the path of self-discovery however we can, through whatever means we can find. And that means doing lots of research and exploring different ways of understanding. So I hope that you found this video thought-provoking. Definitely please like, share, and subscribe for more content and more unpacking of, our own journey of becoming co-creator with the divine. But until next time, keep exploring the mysteries of this universe and living in the present moment, because it's about the journey, not the final destination. Have a great week.